there being libraries full of research material that confirms that regular exercise brings a whole smorgasbord of benefits, statistics from the US Department of Health and Human Sciences revealed that only around 35% of adults engage in regular physical activity, and around 25% admit to doing none at all. So what is it that prevents people from taking a dose of medicine that's clearly good for them? Now, to uncover the reasons, we need to dig deep to appreciate the psychology of fitness. So this presentation will establish some basic facts regarding attitudes to exercise, the thought process that leads to action and tips you into making the decision to pursue a more active lifestyle. A UK study revealed that sedentary people hold fairly negative perceptions of exercise, feeling that it's difficult, unpleasant, maybe even pointless. It was suggested that this was primarily influenced by their experiences of physical education and sports participation at school. Sadly, when these people were asked to discuss exercise, they were happy to declare their goals, but they also offered the difficulties they anticipated, effectively immediately putting up barriers to change. Now, to get some insights into why this is, let's visit our first subject matter expert, Jason Satterfield, Professor of Clinical Medicine and Director of Behavioral Medicine at the University of California in San Francisco. Now, I asked Professor Satterfield, what are some of the physiological barriers that prevent people from embracing a healthier lifestyle? And for some insights into how can we overcome them?
In general, we're sort of wired to appreciate things that happen relatively soon rather than relatively late. For something like exercise, that punishment comes up front, and the reward isn't until many months, maybe even many years down the road. So it's almost as if the reward structure needs to be reversed so that you get that reward up front so that it reinforces that behavior and you want to do it again. The next thing that comes to mind is that we oftentimes as medical providers forget about the complexities of life. And it's a funny thing because we're humans too and we have complex lives too, but we'll give a patient what we think is an attainable goal without realizing the amount of work stress, the amount of family stress, that there are actually 3 or 4 other behavioral changes that they're trying to do at exactly the same time, the financial stress, this complicated calculus of life that we often don't take into account as we're working through a behavior change program. So we want to know not just is it the patient's goals, are they attainable goals, are there immediate rewards, does it fit into their life right now, and is it sufficiently high enough priority that they'll be able to engage and they'll be able to succeed. There are a lot of stories and there's a lot of suggestions. The controlled studies that have been done using incentives, they typically use a monetary incentive. So a person, each time they go to the gym, each time they put in a certain number of minutes on a treadmill, they will get a monetary reward, either immediately or it's put in a bank so that they can see that amount that's growing and growing and growing. In fact, they've used that for a lot of different preventive health behaviors. Do you get your vaccinations? Do you get your mammogram? Do you get your colonoscopy? And essentially, paying people to do things that are good for them works. So those incentives actually do work, as funny as that might feel.
As you can see, one method of successfully overcoming obstacles is to motivate people by helping them to understand the many benefits of exercise and then to balance them against the negatives so the value of adopting a healthy lifestyle becomes apparent. Once the advantages of change are recognized, we're all able to develop a realistic plan of action that will remove those barriers. Let's look more specifically at what are the barriers and how they rate under separate classifications, from the most important first, and also their components, being listed in descending order of their score. Now, the biggest barrier is time. People say they don't have time, no time because of work, young children to look after. Secondly, there are emotional factors. I'm not the sporty type, I'm too shy, I might even get injured. What about motivation? I need to rest in my spare time, surely, or I don't have the energy, or I probably won't keep it up, so no point in starting. Another point is access. I've got nobody to do it with. It's a bit expensive. There are no suitable local facilities. I've not got the right clothes or equipment. And then perhaps physical injury or disability. Does that prevent you? Maybe I'm too fat. Maybe I'm not healthy enough to even participate. Maybe I'm too old. Now, these previously mentioned points don't tell the whole story, however, as men and women also rate barriers slightly differently. So there's a gender factor at play here. For example, women are much less likely to participate in sport, considering themselves to not be the sporty type. So walking, cycling, group exercise classes might be the better starting modes. Women are twice as likely as men to cite their career role, so home exercise equipment and workout DVDs are an ideal answer here. Work pressures were given as a reason by more men than women, so finding a way to build exercise into the daily routine is a solution, and we'll talk more about this later. Injury problems tend to affect men more than women and older more than younger. So a tactic here is to move away from high-intensity sports to more moderate options, so maintaining a competitive outlet but reducing the taxing effects of wear and tear on the body. Now, the idea of joining a gym presents specific concerns and worries for some people, but these can be listed and countered as follows. Complicated exercises. Well, you could easily request your instructor designs a workout using the most basic movements to start with. Ensure you work slowly to begin with, allowing you to master technique and reducing the risk of injury to the muscles, joints and connective tissue. Unusual activities. A common sense approach is stick with what you know. At the start, it makes sense to do what you're comfortable with, as there'll be plenty of time to get a little more adventurous later. Doing too much too soon. Now, a good instructor should guide you on this point, but you can help by taking responsibility for yourself, ensuring you begin at a comfortable speed, a comfortable resistance, whatever it is, and also allow for gradual progression. And this progression can be in the number of visits, the duration of your workout, the intensity of the exercise you're actually doing. Technical equipment can be a barrier. Now, most cardio stations include a quick start option, and the instructors are there to help you. So if you forget what you were shown in your first induction, don't be afraid to ask them. Being unable to monitor your pulse can sometimes be tricky, as this is required often for us to work out at the right intensity. Now, this isn't so easy when you're moving on the cardio machine, so opt for an alternative method of judging your workout. A rate of perceived exertion is one such method, and again, your instructor will explain this simple system to you. Now, studies have shown us that not just regular exercise, but even a single session can lead to improved feelings of well-being. We're talking here about improved self-esteem, increased productivity at work, enhanced self-image, better confidence. Don't we all want that? Now, the third item in this list that's key to taking up exercise is how people view themselves. This is often based on previous history, and it's a hard one to influence. Even if the doctor has proposed exercise to aid the treatment plan for a particular medical condition, if someone feels incompetent, this can be a detractor. But a little more about this later. Now, a startling fact is that despite the evolutionary improvements in technology, and as an indirect result, therefore, a general increase in our standards of living, mental illness has grown and continues to do so, with an estimated 17% of adults suffering major depression at some point in their lives. While stress management techniques, psychotherapy and drugs are common prescriptions, as we discuss in our separate presentations on this topic, exercise can be shown to be a strong solution. So let's go back to Professor Satterfield to understand the clinical research behind the link between physical exercise and cognitive function.
We know if a person engages in regular aerobic activity, there are two chemicals that are released that help us to understand why their cognitive function improves and also why their mood improves in the case of depression. Now, the two chemicals we're talking about, the first is BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factors, essentially fertilizers for our neurons that help them to grow. They grow new branches, they grow more interconnections, improving cognitive functioning. The second is maybe on a little more sort of practical and obvious level. As we become more physically fit, as we have more cardiorespiratory fitness, our circulation improves. As your circulation improves, more energy, more oxygen can move to the brain. But the second chemical that's released is something called VEGF, which is vasal endothelial growth factor, fertilizer for arteries and veins. It just helps us to grow new vessels that are going to carry that blood supply to our brain. So if you're taking better care of your brain, you're growing your neurons, you're feeding it better with oxygen and nutrients, you're going to have better cognitive function, you're going to have a better mood.
Let's look at what else exercise is doing for our mental state. Exercise stimulates positive thoughts and feelings that balance negative moods and leads to improved self-esteem. This in turn affects our performance at work and relationships. Mastering new skills leads to improved confidence, and physical activity gives lots of opportunities for this, helping to promote a more positive outlook. Now, there is a school of thought that believes exercise itself might not be the treatment, but acts as a distraction from the causes of anxiety, acting in the same way as meditation. Shared pleasure is known to boost mood state, and physical activity can be a route to forming new friendships that result in more positive feelings about life in general. Irrespective of the precise mechanism behind the link between exercise and good mental health, the key is to shift towards changing behaviour and then making efforts to maintain those changes. The difficulty here is that behaviour change very rarely arises from a momentary decision, but it's a process of different stages. Firstly, pre-contemplation, the idea of considering starting an exercise program, say during the next 6 months. Then contemplation, which is seriously considering starting an exercise program within the next 6 months. We then move to preparation. We're going to begin exercising within the next 60 days. This hopefully then leads to action the first 6 months of following an exercise program. Then maintenance, sustaining that exercise program for longer than 6 months. We need to be aware of relapse, which is whereby we return to the previous stage, but that doesn't stop us moving forwards. And then finally, hopefully, we arrive at termination, which is the successful consolidation of the behaviour into our regular lifestyle. Now, moving through the early stages is very much a thought process, whilst making progress in the latter stages relies on action. The thought process may be stimulated by reading an article in the newspaper about the risk of heart disease, being associated with lack of exercise, or perhaps struggling to play with the kids without sitting down, puffing and panting. The point is, there's usually a trigger, and this is supported by the fact that 83% of those on the National Weight Control Registry reported that one single event acted as a stimulation for change. This could lead to unhappiness, being unfit, and maybe even imagining how things could be different. As that snowball begins to roll, it's possible these result in a conscious effort to seek out gyms and/or sports clubs in the local area. Now, moving into action, the next stage is commonly to make an appointment to join a gym and to inform family and friends of the new commitment. Taking this interaction further, planning to exercise with a friend or booking a personal trainer are examples of the next step, and with confidence growing, independent efforts such as regularly walking the dog or doing a spot of gardening at weekends might follow. Rewards for your achievement should come next, as they're shown to assist adherence, and the final stage is reached when tactics are developed to avoid problem situations. For example, recording television programs to allow attendance at certain exercise classes. Now, to move through the stages, a decision has to be made based on comparing pros and cons, or more laterally, the desire to move away from pain and closer to pleasure. Clearly then, if a person is struggling to make the move to the next level, external encouragement could be all that is required to tip the scale and avoid the risk of relapse, whereby we drop back to the previous stage. Unfortunately, as we've already discussed, there are a number of reasons that can prevent us from making this journey from thought to action, and these key issues being as follows. Lack of time. I often hear that people work late and then they don't want to exercise because they've been told that it's bad to exercise before bed. But that's their only time, so they're stuck in a rut of not exercising. But is this even true? I asked one of America's experts in sleep, Craig Heller, Professor of Biology and Human Biology at Stanford University, if it's a myth or a fact that you shouldn't exercise before sleeping. Here's what he had to say.
You can definitely exercise before going to bed and still have good sleep. There is a myth that's associated with exercise before sleep. It's not only a myth, it's actually a bullet point in a brochure put out by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine that one of the pieces of advice for improving your sleep is avoid exercise within something, I think it's 3 hours of bedtime. What's wrong? Because we know that exercise, mild exercise, promotes a rise in temperature. The rise in temperature promotes good sleep. Okay? So where does the myth come from? The myth comes from thinking of intense exercise that involves emotionality, such as competitive sports. So if you are on an ice hockey team and you have your rink time at 11 p.m. and you have a terribly aggressive game, you're not going to have good sleep following that. But it's not because of the exercise per se, it's because that it involved activation of your sympathetic nervous system, all of the emotionality and the fight or flight responses that are the result of a competitive sport.
Well, I guess it looks as if that excuse is out of the window. Now, as we mentioned earlier, overcoming these barriers usually relies upon a trigger, although this will be more powerful if followed by the setting of clearly defined goals. Now, in order to help you achieve the results you desire, you should use the SMART system. Now, I'm aware some of you will have heard of this, maybe used it before, but let's look at it in a little more detail. A SMART goal satisfies the following components. It needs to be something specific. We need to be able to measure it. It's got to be achievable, realistic, and timed. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. What precisely do you want to achieve? The more specific the goal, the more powerful a tool it is in motivating us. Is it to run a 5K race, to look great for a wedding, or simply shape up for the beach? These are all examples. It needs to be measurable. By recording weight and circumference measurements, then comparing these after 6 weeks, for example, you can begin to quantify the positive change. Now, a goal needs to be achievable, and some would argue that, well, you can achieve virtually anything you set your mind to. However, if you bear in mind your current fitness level, your previous exercise experience and the resources available to you, this will put it into a much better context. Our goals need to be realistic. Now, this is similar to achievable, but focuses a little more on the general reality. Whilst it may be possible to make significant positive changes to your well-being, altering your genetic makeup and dreaming of a career as a ballet dancer must be avoided. I would also add that if you like it, you'll do it, and if you hate it, you won't. The final and most important factor is time. Unless you build time parameters into the goals, you could perhaps procrastinate and end up being more frustrated and less focused than when you started. Now, the actual choice of goal is vitally important. It becomes that motivating force. It becomes the difference between success and failure. So what sort of goals do people normally select? Let's have a look. Now, top of our list is to feel in good shape physically, both men and women scoring that very highly. Slightly lower down, surprisingly, is the sense of achievement. Getting outside, obviously, is a motivating factor, but let's look at maintaining or losing weight. And surprisingly, there's quite a gender difference there. And it's nice to see that having fun rates in that list of important factors. I'm sure most of these will come as no surprise and score highly on that sample population who responded to that survey. The most important point to learn here is that there exists a myriad of desired outcomes that can provide motivation for you to begin and adhere to an exercise program. So don't narrow your vision when choosing your goals. Another piece of useful advice is to write down the outcome, but then support it by adding one line stating what it will mean to you and how it will change things for you. Now, there are two crucial things to consider here. If you're at the point of thinking about beginning a new exercise regime, or indeed you've taken the plunge recently, firstly, you'll remember when we discussed the stages of change earlier, we mentioned relapse. Since, let's be honest, this is almost inevitable, it makes sense to plan for it so it doesn't grow from a simple relapse into a major collapse. Common sense dictates that there's always the chance that illness, work deadlines, family commitments, holidays may, both unexpectedly and sometimes expectedly even, throw your program off the rails. Accept that they happen Don't beat yourself up about it. Reflect upon the positive notion that you've already made changes and started some way down the road to a new you, and then just move on. You can't stop the festive season, but a little forethought and getting straight back to your program after will ensure that damage limitation is minor. Secondly, perhaps singularly the most vital concept to grasp on this topic is self-responsibility. A fitness instructor can design the perfect routine. Family and friends can give you support, but the truth is that nobody else will do it for you. This is why it's so valuable to have your goals written down and clearly defined. When you feel enthusiasm beginning to drain, read these again and take a quiet moment to yourself. Just try to imagine how you'll feel when you achieve those goals, what those around you might say. Because these are what make the short-term effort worthwhile. Perhaps one of the easiest routes to building a healthy lifestyle is to try to find ways to introduce exercise into your daily routine, as this helps to overcome nearly all of the previously mentioned barriers. Now, the good news is that non-exercise activity thermogenesis, as the scientists refer to it, was shown in a 2005 study to amount to an energy expenditure of around 350 calories a day, which is in line with what you'd expect from most moderate intensity exercise classes. Now, any kind of activity counts. Mopping the floor, washing the car, even fidgeting actually helps. And there are cumulative benefits. So, let's consider a few options, a few things you could try. What about walking briskly around the shopping mall, ensuring you cover the whole footprint prior to stopping to take a look in any shop windows or make any purchase? And in addition, always take the stairs instead of the elevator. What about forgetting the automatic car wash? Wash the car yourself. You can do it just as well, and you'll be burning calories at the same time. What about taking the dog for more frequent walks? What you could also do is aim to gradually increase the distance you cover in the same period of time. Almost becomes a measure of our improving fitness as well. If you're confined to a desk all day, you could still give your waistline a good workout. Think of this. If you're sitting upright with a long neck and shoulder blades back, if you sit on the edge of your chair and hold on to the sides, and then simply lifting the knees up towards your chest, both together, is a really effective way of working the abdominals. Could you do that next time you're sat at your desk? You might want to check nobody's looking while you do it. What about trying to find new ways to play actively with the kids? From football to frisbee, hopscotch to hide and seek, you can make a serious difference to both your energy levels and your relationship with the kids with just investing this little bit of quality time. How much time do you spend on hold during telephone calls? This frustrates me. But could you, while you're holding on that call, be doing some squats? Maybe. Could we be doing some leg lifts to the side, working into the hips and thighs? Maybe even better still, to the rear, working into the buttocks. So next time you're parked on switchboard, I'll expect you to be doing a couple of those exercises. Dance is a great way to get fit. So what about taking dance lessons with a friend? Or better still, simply move the coffee table out of the centre of the lounge, turn the music up loud and go with the flow. It's often said, but it works. Could we leave the car at home just for one little errand? Do we sometimes use the car when we could walk just as well? And then what about getting busy in the garden? It's a good workout, so why not plant something soon? Who knows? You might even end up eating the fruits of your labours. What about if we're office bound? Is it possible to go and talk face to face? Do we have to rely on phones and emails to talk to our colleagues? And also, while you're there, if you're doing any photocopying, a great exercise you can do is to simply move your feet a little further back from the copier, put your hands on the side, and a couple of little press-ups will tone the chest, shoulders, and arms. Simple exercise. No excuses. And then what about what I call supermarket aerobics? How quickly can you do the grocery shopping? Now, The trick is you need to ensure you go up and down every aisle, even if you don't need anything in those particular sections. And better still, pack your own bags, carry them to the car yourself. If you must use the trolley for this, take the trolley back to the store rather than leaving it at the collection point in the car park. Now, a tactic I've used myself: museums. They're fabulous places. Take the kids to the museum, particularly if the weather's miserable. They tend to be large, the kids learn a little bit, and you can lose a few pounds in covering the distance. And the TV. Now, the dreaded ad breaks. There are always going to be ad breaks, but why don't we use that time? What about every time there's an ad break, we decide to jog on the spot, to relieve the boredom? What about we hit the floor and do some crunches? Either way, it's going to keep your metabolic rate up high. Of course, having embarked upon a fitness program, it's still a tough job to maintain it, with research published in the International Journal of Sport and Exercise Physiology showing that around 50% of people who begin exercise drop out within the first 6 months. So what actually motivates people to begin exercise, and more importantly, what keeps them at it? One of the primary motivators to get off the sofa, so to speak, is the concept of future aspiration, by which I mean the desire to be independent in later years or to remain distanced from ill health. This needs to be supported by consistent messages regarding the efficacy of exercise as a route to achieving these goals, together with support from important family members and friends. And the great thing is, this mix becomes a potent cocktail that results in a person's improved sense of ability to take up and succeed at maintaining an exercise routine. Once there is the belief that exercise will make a difference and the self-confidence that it can be done, a specific plan of action will move from thought to reality. And that's exactly where we're taking you in this series. As mentioned, a lot of people fall off an exercise plan very early. So let's take a look at what are the major factors that affect exercise adherence. Believe it or not, men are generally more likely to remain active than women. It's also suggested there's a higher incidence of dropout in the overweight. Now, success is a vital commodity, as the feeling of proficiency at exercise is a key. So, as we mentioned earlier, exercises should always be achievable, never do too much too soon, start out easy. Feeling healthier and improvements in your quality of life are significant factors, but can take a while to manifest. So regular assessments of some form are valuable in providing confirmation that workout endeavours are bearing fruit. So that takes you back to our last lecture on assessing fitness. An instructor or personal trainer who provides knowledge and who helps to set goals is a vital tool. A social element can make a big difference. So studio classes, small group personal training that has become popular in recent years are advised. Believe it or not, even just watching other people exercise has been shown to have benefit. Unsurprisingly, easy access to and feeling comfortable in suitable facilities is important. So shop around when choosing a gym. Having direction has been shown to be very useful. So any attempt to embark upon an exercise regime should begin with devoting some time to setting those SMART goals. So in summary then, bearing in mind that pre-warned is pre-armed, here's a list of tips to help overcome specific barriers. And this is provided by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. You can use this, you can pass it on to a relative or friend when the desire to begin or to continue to exercise begins to wane. Now, I've adjusted it a little bit so it doesn't repeat what we've covered earlier. But let's take a look at these points. So lack of time, I know I keep picking on this one, but it's always listed as the biggest preventative factor in getting into exercise. So what could we do? Could we identify available time slots, monitor your daily activities for a week? Identify at least 3 30-minute slots you could use for physical activity, and trust me, they'll be there. What about 6 15-minute slots instead, which is still going to impact your life significantly? Could you add physical activity to your daily routine, as we've just talked about? Could you select activities that require minimal time, walking, jogging, stair climbing? Social influences. Explain your interest in physical activity to friends and family. Ask them to support your efforts. Invite friends and family members to join you for exercise. Could you plan social activities that involve exercise? Could we all meet up at the park, perhaps? Develop new friendships with physically active people. Join a group, such as the YMCA or a hiking club. Another barrier is travel. If we're on the move, that can sometimes put a block to us exercising. What about putting a jump rope in your suitcase and using it between meetings? What about walking the halls, climbing the stairs? In fact, stair running now in big office blocks has become a competitive event. You could do this in hotels. Could you pick hotels that have swimming pools or exercise facilities? I know I do. Could you join gyms with a reciprocal membership agreement so that when you're in a different town, you can still work out at the club? Could you visit the local shopping mall and walk for half an hour or more? Bring your MP3 player even, and your favourite aerobic music to keep you moving. Finally, what about your retirement years? Is this a time to slow down? No. Let's look upon retirement as an opportunity to become more active instead of less. Could we spend more time gardening? We've got more time to walk the dog, to play with the grandchildren. We could even learn a new skill. This brings me back to dancing, ballroom dancing, square dancing, swimming. You're never too old to learn to swim. Now that you have the time, you can make regular physical activity a part of every day. Go for a walk every morning or every evening before dinner. Treat yourself to an exercise bike and ride every day while you're reading your favourite book or magazine. So there you have it. A list of tips, and there are plenty more in your guidebook, so take a look at that. But my parting thought is, to coin a well-used phrase, they say there's no time like the present. So, what are you waiting for?